Queens, New York, 1962. A working-class neighborhood where nobody had money and everybody had a hustle. Most kids in Bayside grew up dreaming small. A steady job, a house on a quiet street, maybe a car that didn't rattle. One kid never understood the concept of a ceiling. By 14, he was running an ice cream cart on the beach, and he wasn't just selling cones. He was upselling, bundling, and guilt-tripping strangers into buying two when they only wanted one. Tell your friends, come back tomorrow, and bring cash. By summer's end, he'd cleared thousands of dollars from frozen sugar water. Most teenagers his age were saving up for a bike or a stereo. He was already thinking in terms of scale. He tried dental school next, mostly because someone told him dentists made good money. He lasted exactly 1 day. The dean stood in front of the incoming class and told them straight, "If you're here for the money, you picked the wrong profession." He sat there, listened, and walked out before the lecture even ended. Teeth were never the plan. He wanted something bigger and faster, and cavities weren't going to get him there. So he pivoted to meat, literally. Door to door, cooler in the trunk, frozen steaks and lobster tails sold out of the back of a car with zero refrigeration plan and even less business sense. He'd knock, flash a grin, and start talking before anyone could shut the door. For a few wild months, it actually worked. 6 figures a month in revenue. No warehouse, no delivery trucks, no real infrastructure at all. Just charm and volume. Then the spoiled inventory caught up with him. The unpaid bills piled higher than the profits, and the whole operation collapsed under its own weight. But he didn't walk away with nothing. He walked away with a discovery that would define the rest of his life. It was never really about the product. Steaks, surfboards, stock certificates, none of it mattered. What mattered was the pitch, the voice on the other end of the line, the story you could make someone believe. And he had the pitch. Wall Street before the fall. He landed his first real finance job at a respected firm, learning the trade the legitimate way. For a while anyway. It was the 80s, so the office ran on ambition and cocaine in roughly equal measure. Suits, quotas, phones ringing off the hook. He picked up the rhythm fast. How brokers talked, how they closed, how they made complete strangers on the other end of a phone line believe in something they'd never see, touch, or verify. Then the market crashed in October of 1987, and just like that, he was out of a job. Trading floors went silent. Careers ended overnight. Everyone else in that office saw disaster. He saw an opening. Down in the gutter of the financial world sat penny stocks. Companies too small, too shady, or too unproven for any serious firm to bother with. No institutional competition, barely any oversight worth mentioning, and commissions that dwarfed anything available on the legitimate exchanges. He didn't need a fancy office or a research department. He needed a phone, a script, and someone gullible enough to pick up. He found plenty of them. Retirees living on fixed incomes, factory workers with a little savings tucked away, people who'd never bought a share of stock in their lives, now being told they were about to get in early on a company they'd never heard of, based somewhere they couldn't find on a map. It worked because he never really sold the stock itself. He sold the fantasy of the life that stock was supposedly going to buy them, the boat, the vacation home, the early retirement. Building the machine. By the end of the decade, he wasn't working alone anymore. He'd found a partner, chaotic, reckless, loyal to a fault, with none of the polish and all of the hunger of a man with nothing to lose. Together, they built something far bigger and far more dangerous than either of them could have pulled off solo. They called it Stratton Oakmont. The name alone did half the selling. It sounded like old money, like a firm with 100 years of pedigree and leather-bound ledgers behind it. In reality, it was a strip mall office with mismatched furniture, flickering fluorescent lights, and a phone system that never once stopped ringing. He didn't hire experienced brokers. Experience wasn't the point. He hired bartenders, landscapers, and kids, straight out of high school, with nothing to lose and everything to prove. Then he trained them in a system of relentless, scripted persuasion, a method built to steamroll hesitation, drown out doubt, and walk a total stranger from hello to where do I send the check, without ever letting them catch their breath. The office became a factory of noise, phones ringing non-stop, deals closing by the hour, adrenaline replacing coffee as the fuel that kept everyone moving. And beneath all of it sat a simple, repeatable trick. Quietly buy control of a stock while it's cheap, generate artificial hype through hundreds of coordinated sales calls, drive the price up on demand that didn't actually exist, then sell out at the top before the price collapsed back down to nothing. The people left holding worthless shares when the music finally stopped were the same working-class families the firm had targeted from the very beginning. The empire at its peak. By the early 90s, the firm wasn't just profitable, it was a spectacle. Reports from that era describe an office culture built entirely around excess, extravagant bonus checks handed out like party favors, wild celebrations that spilled out of the conference room, a leadership style that ran on fear just as much as reward. Top earners were treated like royalty, showered with cash, trips, and watches. Anyone who couldn't keep pace was humiliated and gone within days, replaced before their desk was even cleared out. The money bought a lifestyle that seemed almost designed to be photographed. A sprawling mansion, a fleet of exotic cars, a 170-foot yacht, a private helicopter. He preached one sermon to his employees, over and over, until it became the office religion. Winning was the only thing that mattered, and anyone not winning was dead weight to be discarded. On paper, the firm looked like a genuine Wall Street success story. Companies taken public, hundreds of millions raised, headlines written, imitators springing up. Underneath, none of it was built on anything real. It was theater, dressed up in Italian suits and pretending to be capitalism. The cracks. By the mid-90s, the foundation was rotting from the inside. The firm kept running the same playbook on IPO after IPO. Inflate the hype, oversell the story, cash out before anyone noticed the company behind the stock barely existed. But the pattern was becoming impossible to hide. Regulators started flagging a growing list of irregular filings. Investors who'd bought in high and watched their positions crater started filing complaints that landed on the right desks. Behind the scenes, the money laundering machine grew more elaborate by the month. Offshore accounts scattered across multiple countries, shell companies with names that led nowhere, relatives' names used as cover, cash physically smuggled overseas by couriers who had no idea what they were really carrying. What leadership liked to call protecting assets, federal investigators would eventually call exactly what it was: a crime. Inside the office, the drug use that had once been treated like a reward had become something closer to a requirement just to keep functioning through 18-hour days. People were burning out in real time, collapsing at their desks, lashing out over commissions, spiraling in ways nobody upstairs cared to notice. And the man at the center of it all was unraveling right along with his company. His marriage was falling apart under the weight of secrets that were getting harder to hide. His judgment, chemically impaired more often than not, was getting people hurt, including, on at least one occasion, his own young daughter, riding in a car he never should have been driving. Then came the boat. In the summer of 1996, against his own captain's explicit warning, he pushed to sail through dangerous weather across the Mediterranean. The yacht very nearly sank in open water. The Italian Navy had to be called in to rescue everyone aboard. He survived. The illusion that he was somehow untouchable did not. The investigation back home. The walls were closing in from every direction at once. Financial journalists had started digging into the firm's filings and finding things that didn't add up. Former employees, burned by unpaid bonuses or facing their own legal trouble, began quietly talking to federal investigators. One agent in particular spent years methodically building a case, pulling phone records, subpoenaing wire transfers, tracing real estate purchases that didn't remotely match anyone's reported income, and noticing a suspicious pattern of cash withdrawals structured specifically to stay under reporting thresholds. Some of his own people flipped before he ever saw it coming. They wore wires into meetings. They handed over folders full of internal documents. And in the fall of 1996, federal agents raided the firm's offices at dawn, seizing hard drives, filing cabinets, and whatever paperwork employees hadn't managed to shred or stuff into a briefcase on the way out the door. Even then, he couldn't stop himself. In early 1997, while under active investigation and explicitly told not to move any more money, he wired millions overseas anyway. That transfer was traced within days. The phone conversation about it had already been recorded. It became the single piece of evidence that ultimately sealed everything. The fall and the second act. By the time it was over, he was staring down decades in federal prison on charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. Facing that kind of exposure, he did what he'd always done best. He made a deal. He cooperated fully. He wore a wire against the very partners who'd built the empire alongside him. Dozens of people who'd once worked for him, some who'd joined straight out of high school and never known any other version of Wall Street, were indicted one by one. Several of them ended up serving considerably more time than he did. His own sentence, 22 months, in a low-security facility with no fences and unarmed guards. He played tennis in the mornings, he lifted weights in the afternoons, and in the evenings he wrote. That's where the story takes its strangest turn. He met a fellow inmate, a well-known comedian doing time on an unrelated charge, and started telling him the whole saga. The fraud, the drugs, the sinking yacht, the collapse of everything he'd built. The response wasn't outrage, it was fascination. Write it down, he was told. So he did. The memoir came out in 2007, and it wasn't written as an apology. It read like a highlight reel of the very crimes that had ruined so many lives. No real remorse on the page, just chaos, bravado, and punchlines dressed up as a cautionary tale. It sold extremely well. The film rights sold not long after. And in 2013, a major Hollywood director and one of the biggest movie stars on the planet turned the whole story into an award-nominated blockbuster. The man who'd built an empire lying to strangers over the phone was now being celebrated for it on the big screen, in theaters, with popcorn. What never made it to the screen? The people he actually defrauded didn't get a movie deal out of any of this. They didn't get a redemption arc, or a soundtrack, or a standing ovation. Court records show he was ordered to pay roughly $110 million in restitution to the people he'd scammed, retirees who lost their entire retirement, veterans who'd invested their life savings, families who'd remortgaged their homes chasing a promise that was never real. Decades later, only a small fraction of that money has actually been paid back. Much of it reportedly vanished into the same kind of offshore structures that got him caught in the first place. Meanwhile, he's built an entirely legitimate-looking second career: motivational speaking, sales training courses, more books, a global speaking circuit that pays him handsomely to teach the very persuasion techniques he once used to rob people blind. He's taken the very nickname that should have followed him around in shame for the rest of his life and rebranded it into a personal brand that people now pay good money to learn from. He didn't just avoid the full weight of consequence for what he did. He found a way to package the story of avoiding it and sell that too. And maybe that's the most uncomfortable part of this entire saga. Not that he got away with it, but that so many people were, and still are, more than happy to watch him do it, cheer for him doing it, and buy tickets to see it dramatized. We didn't just forgive the con. On some level, a lot of us wanted to believe we could pull it off too.